Major Evelyn Calloway paused in the threshold the way she'd been trained to pause at a doorway in a bad part of town, long enough to mark exits, faces, and sight lines, brief enough to look like simple hesitation. She gave herself 3 silent heartbeats. Panel at the far end. Gallery to the rear. 2 MPs by the double doors. 1 tall window cracked for ventilation, its shade trembling in the storm's breath. She stepped in. Fort Braxton's tribunal chamber tried to be dignified and only managed claustrophobic. Dark wood and brass fixtures boxed the air until it tasted like varnish. The floor swallowed sound, and the walls gave it back a second later, magnified. A thunderhead had camped over the base since dawn, and each pulse of lightning bleached the room to bone before returning it to sepia gloom. Every face carried its own weather system, grief, suspicion, exhaustion, swirling beneath the fluorescent hum. Everin's shoes whispered across the carpet. Her uniform looked like a diagram of regulation, pressed to the millimeter, nameplate straight, ribbons aligned. The ribbons told a story if you knew the alphabet, but most people in that room didn't. They saw the modest bar of color and filed her with the quiet, the administrative, the safe. The distinguished service cross-gleamed without ceremony, and even that drew the kind of sideways glance usually reserved for clerks who'd inherited a painting they didn't deserve. The family sat in the gallery behind her path, and their hope pressed between her shoulder blades like a hand. Photos rested in mothers' laps, faces of sons and daughters in stiff collars and too large hats, caught mid-smile at that age when every promise still felt airtight. A toddler traced a finger over a frame, leaving an oval of fog on the glass. An older man, father or grandfather, stared at his knuckles as if answers were carved there. At the long bench, Judge Advocate General Harlan Mercer presided with the expression of a man sentenced to endure lesser minds. Silver hair combed by a ruler, mouth line drawn with a T-square. His file said 62, his eyes said older. Junior officers called him Stone Face when they were 2 doors away and a floor down. He watched Evelyn approach the lectern like a librarian watches a loud patron, interested only in the removal of disruption. To Mercer's right, Colonel Zephyr Blackwood wore Joint Special Operations command like a mask he never removed. Weathered leather face, jaw that could start a mower. He checked a secure phone with the studied indifference of a man who had learned to look calm at altitude. The posture suggested discomfort. The eyes suggested nothing. At a side table sat Defense Secretary Lowell Thornburg, a detail like a typo in a legal brief, small but telling. Cabinet-level attention didn't belong here. Yet here he was, hands folded, gaze too sharp to be passive. Several uniforms had sat up straighter when he entered, as if gravity had increased in the room and their spines were the first to notice. Major approach, Mercer said, the microphone rendering his baritone metallic. Evelyn took her place at the lectern. She didn't clear her throat or adjust the mic. She didn't need the ritual. Stillness, she'd learned long ago, was its own kind of dominance. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the wood. Under the cuff of her right sleeve, a pale line disappeared up her wrist, the ghost of a night no one had put in her personnel file. State your name and rank for the record, Mercer intoned, already bored by the answer he expected. Major Evelyn Calloway, United States Army, sir. Her voice was clear without strain, pitched to carry across busted radios and crowded markets. Mercer glanced at his tablet as if it offended him. Major Calloway, you're here to provide testimony regarding Operation Winterhawk? Yes, sir. I have direct knowledge of the operational parameters and execution. Something flickered, brief and reluctant, across Stone Face. Surprise, maybe. Then it was gone, shuttered behind professional contempt. Proceed with your opening statement. She nodded once. Distinguished members of the tribunal, on March 17th in Nangarhar Province, the operation in question was authorized under. Major, Mercer cut in, palm lifted. Spare us the boilerplate. These proceedings involve classified operations above your clearance. Your enthusiasm is noted. Evelyn reached into her slim briefcase without looking down and drew out a credentials folder. Sir, my operational authority extends. Mercer's hand flicked like a man shooing a fly. He didn't take the folder. "No, Major. I have your record right here." He scrolled with a lazy finger. Administrative Service in Kabul, Logistics Coordination in Qatar, Coalition Training Liaison. Your docket reads like a calendar, not a combat log. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber, fabric shifting. A throat cleared with intent. A murmur that died before it reached the rafters. Somewhere behind her, a lieutenant colonel exhaled a word you didn't say into a microphone. Something about desk jockeys and uniforms. "In short," Mercer said, voice sharpening, "this hearing concerns Tier 1 operations. JSOC authority. You, Major, are not qualified to speak to these matters. Sit down." The words struck the room like the first raindrop before a downpour, small but telling. In the gallery, a mother's mouth pinched. A young officer let himself smirk. He'd wear that expression less often if he met the wrong sergeant in the wrong gym. The MPs by the door shifted weight, uneasy with where this road might go. Evren didn't move. The change in her was microscopic, a redistribution of balance, a degree of angle in the shoulders, nothing an untrained eye would name. She set the folder on the lectern and didn't push it forward. "With respect, Your Honor," she said. Respect lived in the grammar. It did not live in the tone. "There's been a misunderstanding regarding my role." "No misunderstanding," Mercer snapped, faster this time, like a man who has decided speed is authority. "Your record is clear." Across the room, Blackwood's attention lifted from the phone and stayed on her, a hawk's pivot. Thornburg seemed suddenly more present, like a dimmer had been turned up on his outline. In the back row, a retired general leaned forward, the motion tentative, as if surprised at himself for caring. Evren's hands came into view on the edge of the lectern. The knuckles bore the fine, sanded scars of impacts that didn't come from staplers. Someone near the panel noticed. The air around the bench changed by a single degree. "March 17, sir," she said evenly. "We were operating under direct command authority in denied territory. The casualties sustained were the result of..." "Major." Mercer's gavel tapped once, a metronome for hierarchy. "You will take your seat." Silence lengthened. The storm pressed a long palm against the window and rattled the shade. A photo in the gallery flashed white in the lightning, a young sergeant's smile burning into negative in Evren's peripheral vision. She didn't look at it directly. Some images were steadier at the edge of sight. When she spoke again, it was quieter, and for that reason harder to ignore. "If the tribunal is interested in cause and sequence, I can provide both." "We are interested in qualified testimony," Mercer said. He smiled without showing teeth. To some men, a small humiliation feels like grace. Colonel Blackwood will testify next. He has direct operational knowledge. You, Major, will return to the gallery and refrain from further interruptions. In the second row, a captain's smirk broadened, relief sluicing into the space where tension had been. A few heads nodded, order restored, anomaly corrected. The family sagged as hope misfired and dropped. Evren didn't let any of that into her posture. She glanced once at the side table. Thornburg's expression was careful. His eyes were not. They watched her the way an engineer watches a bridge in a high wind. The judge gestured toward the MPs without looking. "Escort Major Calloway." "Your Honor," Evren said. 2 words, nothing more. The sound of them cut across the chamber with the precise, narrow blade of a scalpel. Not loud. Just exact. It bought her exactly the seconds she needed. The MPs halted out of habit. The judge bristled because he had to. Blackwood didn't blink at all, which told her everything. In that pause, Evren let the room in, all of it. The damp wool of uniforms, the metallic aftertaste of recycled air, the electric tang of a storm waiting to break. The grief behind her like surf. The panel's impatience like heat. She remembered assembling a weapon blind with blood on her hands. She remembered a night when silence had been the only cover and names had been the only weight she couldn't set down. She remembered the promise she'd made without witnesses. "I will not let them be turned into paperwork." She picked up the credentials folder and raised it half an inch, enough to acknowledge the ritual, not enough to offer it again. "You requested an opening statement," she said. "Here it is. I can account for the orders that sent those soldiers forward, the moment they broke, and the reason they didn't come home. If the tribunal prefers to hear it from someone else, you may. It'll just be slower." A tremor ran through the gallery, the sound of people wanting to believe, colliding with years of learning not to. One of the mothers rose 3 inches out of her seat and eased back down, as if frightened to disturb the moment. Mercer's mouth hardened. Major Calloway. Behind his nameplate, a thin tablet glowed. A young aide leaned in, whispering fast, pointing once at the screen. Stone's face didn't change, but his pupils did, tightening, then dilating, the way eyes do when light shifts. He cut the aide off with a spare gesture and lifted his gaze to Everin again, recalculating. "Your insistence has been noted," he managed. "Nonetheless, these proceedings will hear from a qualified witness," she finished for him, tone agreeable. "I agree." It was a small act of verbal judo, returning his phrasing wrapped around a proposition he hadn't made. She kept her face open, her voice polite. Even here, even now, the forms mattered. She wasn't here to burn the house down. She was here to unlock a door. Beside the side table, Thornburg's hand flexed once on his pen. Blackwood's phone stayed face down. Mercer tapped the gavel again, gentler, as if he'd felt himself strike too hard the first time. "Major Calloway, last time, take your seat." Everin looked at the families. Not past them or above them, at them. It was enough. The room followed her gaze. A dozen frames of young faces stared back. Lightning burned the glass again, and for a fraction of a second she saw her team reflected there instead. Different names, same ages, the same crooked grins that had dared the world to try them. She returned her eyes to the bench. "Sir," she said, "with respect to this chamber, and to the dead, we can do this with me standing here, or we can do it after we waste 30 minutes reminding each other who outranks whom. Either way, we're going to do it." The words landed and rolled, a quiet wave crossing carpeting and uniforms and oak. Somewhere, a coffee cup touched saucer with a click that sounded too loud. One of the MPs inhaled and forgot to exhale. Mercer stared as if he could stare her into being smaller. The storm pressed its shoulder against the window again. The shade buzzed. Blackwood's pen slid off his notepad and thumped softly against the table. He didn't reach for it. He was looking at her hands. Thornburg didn't move at all. In the back row, the retired general leaned forward, forearms on knees, as if the right posture might coax the truth closer. "Very well," Mercer said at last, the words dry as old paper. "One question, Major. On what basis do you claim direct knowledge of Winterhawk?" Everin let a breath fill and leave her, slow enough to be invisible. She could feel the exact hinge the moment belonged to, like a door about to swing. She put one finger on the edge of the lectern. The scar on her wrist caught the light and vanished again. "On the basis, Your Honor," she said, "that I was there." The room didn't breathe. Outside, thunder stalked the base, nearer now. Mercer opened his mouth, closed it, and reached for the safe refuge of process. "We will reconvene after a brief recess," he began, but the gallery had already tilted forward. Hope breaking surface all at once, noisy as surf. Everin stayed still. Stillness remained her weapon of choice. She had not yet said the word that would rearrange the furniture of this room forever. That belonged to another moment, one she would choose. For now, she let the silence do its work and watched Stone-Face decide whether to learn or to dig. The gavel came down. The room cracked open like sky before rain. The tribunal reconvened after a 20-minute recess that felt more like a standoff than a pause. When the side door opened and Mercer reappeared, he had the clipped composure of a man who had decided exactly how he wanted things to go, and would brook no surprises. Everin had returned to the lectern without being told. It wasn't defiance in posture. It was simply the most logical place to stand if one intended to speak. She didn't fidget with her uniform, didn't glance at her notes. Her eyes stayed on the panel, measuring angles and temperaments like a surveyor checking the grade. Mercer shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling. "Major Calloway, the record will reflect your earlier insistence on addressing the tribunal." However, he raised his head, eyes narrow. I have reviewed your service record a second time. Nothing in it grants you operational clearance for Tier 1 activities. That being the case, you are not authorized to speak to the details of Operation Winterhawk. The word "not" landed hard, polished by years of being used as a gate. In the gallery, the shift in energy was almost audible, a collective exhale of disappointment. Several families slumped back, bracing for more bureaucratic fog. Everyone didn't look back at them. With respect, sir, you've reviewed the public version of my service record. Mercer smiled, and the smile was colder than any frown. There is no other version. That smile, the quiet smugness, triggered something in her, something she didn't let reach her face. She'd seen it before in captains' tents in the middle of nowhere, in war rooms where the safe air conditioning made men think they understood deserts. That look said, "I have the whole picture, and you are just a line item." "I see," she said, as though he'd just told her the weather. Mercer leaned back in his chair. "Major, the scope of these proceedings is limited to admissible, verifiable testimony. Your background in administrative coordination isn't what you think it is," she said, the interruption so even-toned it almost sounded like a continuation. That made Blackwood glance up. Mercer's jaw shifted. "Careful, Major. This is not a sparring match. It's a legal proceeding." Everin's fingers rested on the edge of the lectern. Pale scars crossed her knuckles, thin, irregular lines, the kind you didn't get from office work. One of the junior officers noticed, his smirk faltering into something less certain. "I am being careful," she said. "Careful enough to say only what is necessary." Mercer's voice dropped to a lower register, meant to close doors. "Then say nothing at all. Return to your seat." She didn't move. The stillness was deliberate now, waited. She let it stretch just long enough for the MPs at the door to exchange a glance. "Sir," she said finally, "you have families here who've waited months for answers. You have officers who've decided, without evidence, that they already know the scope of my experience. And you have me, someone who can tell you what happened on March 17th from the inside." Mercer's expression barely shifted, but a faint line appeared between his brows. "Major, you are not on trial here, but you are in violation of direct instruction." Her gaze was steady. "I've been in violation of direct instruction before." It was a simple statement, but it hung in the room like a scent people couldn't place, familiar but unsettling. Thornburg's eyes narrowed slightly. Blackwood's fingers stilled over his phone. Even the MPs seemed to register the undertone. Mercer straightened in his chair, as if to reassert scale. "Your past assignments do not grant you license to dictate terms here." "No," she agreed, "but the truth does." It was quiet enough to hear the air handler kick on. In the back row, the retired general's lips curved, just barely. Mercer leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "I'll say this plainly, Major. You will step away from that lectern, or I will have you removed." That was the moment she let something slip, not a smile, not a word. Just a change in her eyes, a subtle sharpening that made them seem to focus past Mercer, past the panel, into some distance only she could see. And for a heartbeat, she wasn't in the tribunal at all. She was somewhere colder, darker, where the only light came from a scope's reticle, and the only sound was her own breathing in a headset. When her gaze returned to the room, it carried a weight the panel couldn't quite account for. "I've been removed from worse places," she said. The words were soft, but they made Blackwood set his pen down completely. Thornburg stopped watching her and started studying her. Mercer opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when the aide at his elbow leaned in again, whispering fast, showing him something on the secure tablet. Whatever it was, it drained the color from his face a shade. He covered it with bluster. "Major Calloway, you are this close to contempt." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, a gesture that in another context might have looked like curiosity. "Contempt," she said, "works both ways." The storm outside cracked, thunder rolling close enough to make the window tremble. It was Mercer who looked away first. The air in the tribunal felt denser now, as though the storm outside had found a way in. Mercer's glare hadn't moved, but it no longer had the full force of authority. It was the glare of someone trying to reassert control over a scene that had slipped sideways. Evelyn didn't shift her stance. She didn't raise her voice. "You want to talk about qualifications," she said, "but qualifications come in different languages. I'm fluent in the one that matters for this conversation." Mercer's hand closed around the gavel. "Major." She leaned closer to the microphone, her movement measured, precise. Her eyes stayed locked on his, but her voice was pitched to carry to every corner of the chamber. "Obsidian." The single word landed without hurry, but it detonated all the same. The effect was immediate. Colonel Blackwood froze mid-breath, fingers suspended above his notepad, as if a single wrong move might make the moment vanish. His jaw tightened in a way no one in the room had seen before. At the side table, Thornburg's eyes closed for half a second, just enough to register recognition, then opened with the sort of clarity that comes from decisions already made. A clatter from the back row, ceramic against tile, snapped a few heads around. An older man in civilian clothes, the quiet observer who'd sat like a stone all morning, had dropped his coffee cup. He didn't look at the mess on the floor. He was looking at her. In the gallery, confusion rippled among the families. They didn't know the word, but they knew the weight of it. The smirks were gone, replaced by something sharper. Curiosity mixed with a faint electric hope. Mercer blinked, once slow. "What did you say?" Evelyn didn't repeat herself. "You heard me." The aide at Mercer's side bent over the tablet, fingers moving in a flurry. A second later, he angled the screen toward the judge. Mercer's complexion shifted another shade paler, his lips thinning. "What exactly," he said, the words suddenly careful, "do you claim to be?" "I'm not here to claim," Evelyn said evenly. "I'm here to confirm." Blackwood rose from his seat without waiting to be recognized. "Request immediate classified session," he said, his voice carrying the clipped precision of someone invoking procedure he'd hoped never to use. Before Mercer could answer, Thornburg stood. "That won't be necessary." The chamber's noise dimmed like someone had turned a knob. "This hearing is now under direct Department of Defense authority." Mercer turned toward him, surprise and irritation competing for room on his face. "Mr. Secretary." "What I'm about to say," Thornburg continued, "is classified at the highest level. Before you stands the operational commander of Task Force Obsidian, the unit responsible for the most successful counterterrorism campaign in modern history." A breathless pause. Then the whispering began, like dry leaves scraping across stone. From the gallery, a voice, quiet, reverent, cut through. "We thought you were dead, ma'am." Everin's reply was without drama. That was the point. Blackwood's salute was sharp, formal, absolute. A colonel saluting a major was not normal protocol, but no one dared correct him. The photographs in the family's hands suddenly carried new gravity. One couple in the third row looked down at their son's picture, then back at her, eyes wide. On her wrist, just visible where her sleeve had shifted, was a small, distinct tattoo, an exact match for the mark on their boy's forearm in the photo. Mercer's voice came again, but softer now, the authority recalibrated. "The tribunal recognizes command authority, Obsidian." Around the room, the air had changed. Respect replaced dismissal. Uncertainty replaced condescension. The storm outside cracked again, but this time it felt like punctuation. And Evelyn, still at the lectern, still perfectly still, knew the real work was only just beginning. For a long moment after Mercer's reluctant acknowledgement, the room seemed to hold its breath. The shuffle of papers, the hum of fluorescent lights, even the low murmur of the storm outside, all of it faded into a stillness that had nothing to do with silence and everything to do with weight. Thornburg stepped forward from his place at the side table, moving with the measured precision of someone who knew every pair of eyes was on him. He carried a black folder stamped with the unmistakable block lettering of classified material. When he stopped beside Evelyn, the effect was deliberate. Two figures at the center of the room, one just revealed, the other revealing. "This," Thornburg said, resting a hand on the folder, "is the actual service record of Commander Evelyn Calloway, declassified as of this moment." He didn't glance at Mercer, but the words were aimed like a thrown blade. The version you've all seen was a construct necessary for the protection of ongoing operations and the lives of those involved. He opened the folder with a quiet snap, drawing out the first sheet. Operational Commander, Task Force Obsidian. 6 years of black operations across 5 continents. Dozens of high-value targets eliminated or captured. Critical infrastructure dismantled before attacks could be carried out. Collateral damage near zero. He looked up. That kind of record isn't just unusual. It's unheard of. Murmurs rippled through the officers present, those who understood exactly what such a resume implied. In the gallery, the families leaned forward, hearing the cadence of truth in Thornburg's voice even if the acronyms and designations meant nothing to them. Mercer's posture had altered just enough to betray the shift. He still sat at the center of the bench, still nominally in control of the room, but his hands now rested flat on the desk, fingers still, as though anchoring himself. Thornburg went on. Obsidian was designed for missions too sensitive for conventional forces, where attribution to the United States could never be allowed. Its existence has been denied in every forum, every briefing, every record, until now. And the only reason it is being acknowledged here is because Commander Calloway has chosen to break cover in the interest of truth for the families in this room. In the third row, the woman who held the photograph of a young sergeant clutched it tighter. "He served under you?" she asked, her voice carrying in the quiet. Evren turned toward her. The movement was small but full of intent. "He did," she said. "He served with distinction. He died protecting his team, and by extension, protecting hundreds of civilians who will never know his name. Until today, I couldn't tell you that. Now I can." The woman's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. Her husband's hand found hers, holding it with the same fierce pressure she gave the photograph. Mercer cleared his throat, an attempt to reclaim formality. "Mr. Secretary, Commander, while I respect the necessity of certain operations, this tribunal was convened to investigate the loss of life during Operation Winterhawk. Declassification of unrelated history." "It is not unrelated," Thornburg cut in. His voice sharpened, the tone of a man unused to being challenged. "The mission in question was a Task Force Obsidian operation, which means there is no one more qualified to testify than the woman who led it." That landed hard. Mercer's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew the optics. To protest further now would be to openly deny the validity of the tribunal's newly acknowledged highest value witness. Evren faced the panel again, her voice steady but carrying a weight no rank could confer. "On March 17th in Nangarhar Province, we were tasked with a high-value target acquisition in a contested zone. The mission was conducted under direct Department of Defense authority. Every action taken was within the parameters I was given, parameters that shifted mid-operation due to intelligence updates from higher command." Blackwood, silent until now, leaned forward. "Updates that originated from Joint Special Operations Command." His voice was neutral, but his eyes weren't. "They did," Evren confirmed. "And the casualties sustained were not the result of poor planning or execution by my team. They were the result of those changes made without my consultation, in the middle of active engagement." The words settled like lead in the room. Officers in the gallery stiffened. Families leaned closer. For them, it wasn't the operational detail that mattered. It was the subtext. The loss of their loved ones might not have been inevitable. Mercer broke the silence. "Commander, you understand the implications of that statement." "I do," she said. "Better than most." Thornburg closed the folder and set it on the lectern in front of her. "From this point forward, Commander Calloway will provide the tribunal with her account, unredacted, within the limits of what can be made public. That is the directive of the Department of Defense." A low rumble of thunder rolled through the walls, as though punctuating his words. Evren placed both hands on the lectern, not braced, but anchored. "Then let's begin." The tribunal recessed for the day under the brittle formality of an unscheduled adjournment. No one in the room really believed it was about scheduling. The air was too charged, too full of eyes that had seen the shape of something vast behind the curtain. Evren exited through a side corridor instead of the public doors. 2 MPs fell into step behind her without being asked, their presence less about guarding her and more about insulating her from the sudden attention. Even so, she caught flashes, uniforms pausing mid-stride to watch her pass, whispered conversations that broke off when she neared. At the end of the hall, Thornburg was waiting. Beside him, Colonel Blackwood stood with the rigid posture of a man balancing deference and urgency. A third figure leaned casually against the wall, General Hawthorne, retired, but carrying himself like the rank still fit. "Commander," Thornburg said, his tone neither warm nor cold, but heavy with intent. "Walk with us." They led her into a secured conference room. No windows, muted lighting. A table meant for war maps and closed-door decisions. As the door sealed behind them, the muffled hum of the tribunal was cut away, leaving only the sound of the ventilation. Blackwood was first to break the silence. "You put Mercer on his heels today. That doesn't happen often." "I wasn't aiming for him," Everin replied. "Just the truth." Thornburg's gaze was steady. "The truth is a dangerous habit, Commander. And right now, it's a currency we can spend in only one direction." Hawthorne pushed a folder across the table toward her. "This isn't tribunal business," he said, his voice like gravel over steel. "It's something else entirely." She didn't reach for it immediately. "What's in there?" "Intelligence packet," Hawthorne said. "Recon analysis, intercepts, asset reports. Target profiles in the last section." Everin opened the folder, flipping through the documents. Aerial photographs of a mountainous region, snowcaps, narrow valleys, a spiderweb of footpaths and hidden roads. Satellite timestamps. Infrared overlays. Then the face, a grainy still from a drone camera, the man's features blurred by motion, but unmistakably dangerous. "Codename Viper," Blackwood said. "Former GRU asset, now freelancing as a broker for, let's call them bad actors. He's building something in those mountains, something we can't let him finish." She studied the file. "You've got Tier 1 teams for this." Thornburg shook his head. "Viper knows how Tier 1 moves. He's been studying us for years. He'll see them coming from a continent away." "That's where you come in," Hawthorne said. "Obsidian was built for ghosts. You're the last one left who can operate with the flexibility and deniability this job demands." Everin closed the folder, fingers resting on its cover. "You're asking me to come out of the shadows for one more op. To pick a team, plan a mission, and put boots in a place I've never been, all under the condition that if anything goes wrong, you'll deny I was ever there." "Yes," Thornburg said simply. "And in exchange, you'll have full operational freedom. No last-minute intel changes, no interference from desks half a world away. You call the shots. All of them." Blackwood leaned in. "And, Commander, this isn't just about Viper. We have reason to believe the intel that got your team killed in Nangarhar was funneled through the same channels he's using now. Take him down, and you get answers about March 17th that no tribunal can give you." There it was, the hook buried inside the bait. Everin sat back in her chair, the silence stretching just long enough to make the three men across from her shift ever so slightly. She thought about the families in the gallery, about the boy with the tattoo that matched hers, about the hollow ache of missions that ended in folded flags. Finally, she exhaled. "If I do this, I choose the team. I choose the timetable. And when I say we pull the plug, we pull it, no questions." Thornburg nodded once. "Agreed." She reached for the folder again, sliding it toward herself. "Then I'll need access to the personnel database." Hawthorne's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in a way that suggested he was trying to guess which ghost she'd go looking for. "Consider it done," Thornburg said. "You have 72 hours. Everin stood, tucking the folder under her arm. "Then I'll see you in 71. As she left the room, the storm outside broke fully, rain hammering the roof like distant gunfire. She didn't slow her pace. In her mind, she was already moving pieces on a map no one else could see. The personnel database was a labyrinth, half outdated records, half deliberately obscured files, but Everin moved through it like a cartographer reading her own map. She didn't start with rank or specialty. She started with trust. The first name she keyed and brought up a file marked inactive, honorable discharge. Sergeant First Class Mason Reeves. Former Communications Chief, Obsidian. A man who could turn static into coordinates and make an enemy's encrypted signal sing like a radio in an open field. Last known location, running a fishing charter out of Corpus Christi. Reeves answered her call on the third ring. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice wary. "It's Calloway." Silence. Then a slow exhale. "You're supposed to be." "I know," she cut in. "I need you." A pause. "Where?" "I'll send coordinates. Bring your gear." He didn't ask why. Just copy. The second was harder. Lieutenant Lachlan Price. Demolitions expert, field improvisation specialist. His file had more disciplinary notes than most enemies had scars. But he'd saved her life twice and the lives of 4 others on missions that had no right to succeed. Current occupation. Deep in the Alaskan interior, running supply runs for isolated communities. She found him in a hangar that smelled of diesel and snow. He saw her before she reached the door and grinned in that way that made people unsure if they were about to be hugged or tackled. "Well, hell," he said. "The ghost walks. I need someone who can make a mountain disappear without collapsing a village." His grin widened. "And here I thought retirement would be boring." Winters took the longest to locate. Captain Anya Winters, medic, marksman, and the quiet compass that had kept Obsidian from tearing itself apart more than once. She'd gone underground after Nangarhar, disappearing into the relief circuit, working disasters with the same calm precision she once applied to battlefield triage. Evren found her in a refugee clinic in northern Greece. The air inside was thick with antiseptic and the quiet chaos of people trying to hold their lives together with whatever thread was left. Winters looked up from a patient's chart and froze for a fraction of a second before setting it down. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know." Winters studied her, searching for the part that hadn't changed. "This isn't tribunal business, is it?" "No." A slow nod. "Then I'll need a day to hand over my cases." By the time Evren returned to the safe house Thornburg had arranged, the rain had stopped, but the streets still gleamed under the streetlights. She pinned a map to the wall, topographical overlays, supply routes, border crossings, and began marking entry points in red grease pencil. One by one, the team arrived. Reeves first, smelling faintly of salt water and diesel. Lachlan next, carrying a duffel bag that clinked ominously when set down. Winters last, her arrival silent, but her presence immediately steadying the room. They didn't ask for the full mission briefing right away. In Obsidian, the bond was that you showed up first, then learned the details. Evren stood by the map, the Viper dossier open on the table beside her. "This is our target," she began. Codename Viper. "We insert in 2 weeks, neutralize the facility, and extract without triggering an international incident. Secondary objective: recover any intel tying him to Nangarhar." Reeves leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "That's a lot of moving parts." "It is," she agreed. "Which is why we'll need to move like shadows and think like ghosts." Lachlan smirked. "Good thing we've done that before." Winters met Evren's gaze. "And when it's over?" "When it's over," Evren said, "you walk away. All of you. No questions, no loose ends." They accepted that without further comment. For this crew, trust was never about the absence of risk. It was about knowing the person beside you had already waited. Later, as the others settled into their corners of the safe house, Evren stood alone at the map. The lines she'd drawn were only the start. Between them lay the choices that could either end Viper's network or end them. She allowed herself a single deep breath. Then she picked up the grease pencil and began drawing the next set of moves. The safe house became less of a shelter and more of a war room within hours. The plain walls disappeared under layers of maps, satellite photos, intercepted comms transcripts, and hastily scribbled notes. Every inch of the central table was buried under gear layouts, weapons manifests, and supply chain diagrams. Evren stood at the head of the table, laser pointer in hand, while Reeves patched into an encrypted channel through a laptop jury-rigged to 3 different satellite relays. "Signal bounce confirmed," he said without looking up. "We've got a 5-second lag, but we're invisible to anyone who doesn't know what they're looking for." 5 seconds is fine," Evren replied. "If someone's tracking us that closely, we'll already have bigger problems." Lachlan leaned over a terrain map, tracing a finger along a jagged ridgeline. This is our bottleneck. One way in, without hitting a checkpoint. We'll need climbing gear for the first mile, sheer rock. Once we're over, it's a goat trail into the valley. Winters frowned. Goat trail means locals. Locals mean variables. And variables mean things that don't go to plan. Which is why we go in at night, Everin said. She tapped the map where the valley narrowed. This ridge gives us cover from aerial scans. The facility's power draw spikes at 0-200 every night, which means they're running something heavy and don't want it noticed. That's our window. Reeves switched the display to an overhead infrared shot of the compound. Two long structures, one squat warehouse-like building, and a smaller detached section near the treeline. Heat signatures here, and here, he said, pointing to bright flares. This one near the trees doesn't match the others. No steady pattern. My guess? It's an uplink or relay, probably how Viper's coordinating his network. Then it's our priority, Everin said. We take that out first, then hit the main facility. Lachlan grinned. And by take it out, you mean? I mean silent, she said flatly. No fireworks. If they know we're coming before we reach the main objective, the op's over before it starts. Winters flipped through the recon images, stopping on one of a guard tower. 4 posted here. Rotations every 3 hours. They're disciplined. No smoke breaks, no chatter. Whoever's running their security has drilled them well. Which means they'll notice if even one of them disappears, Everin said. So we move past the towers without touching them unless we have no choice. The conversation shifted into kit assignments. Lachlan would handle breaching, silent charges, lock overrides, and as a last resort, precision explosives. Winters took point on medical prep and contingency extractions. Reeves would run comms and counter-surveillance, cycling their position through false GPS trails, so even if someone caught a signal, it would point 50 miles away. Everin kept the pacing brisk, every role defined, every fallback accounted for. She'd learned a long time ago that the best way to keep people alive was to leave nothing to chance in the planning stage, because once boots hit the ground, chance would take over anyway. They drilled ingress and egress routes until everyone could recite them without glancing at the maps. The final route looked like a thread drawn by an unsteady hand, winding, doubling back, cutting through ravines and ridgelines to mask heat and sound. As night fell outside the safe house, they ran simulations on a scaled-down mock-up Lachlan built from crates, rope, and chalk lines on the concrete floor. Moves became muscle memory: climb, pivot, sweep, breach, sweep again, plant, and vanish. At midnight, they paused for the first real break of the day. Winters handed out mugs of bitter coffee that smelled faintly of engine oil. Reeves was still bent over his laptop, fingers moving in restless patterns. Everin stepped back from the table, letting her gaze sweep over the maps, photos, and notes. The plan was solid. But plans were lies told to the future, useful lies, but lies all the same. She knew the shape of the unknown would hit them the moment they set foot in those mountains. Still, she felt it, the hum in her blood she hadn't felt since before Nangarhar. The edge of action, sharp and inevitable. Get some rest, she told them. Tomorrow we start packing for real. Lachlan chuckled as he drained his coffee. Packing for real, he said, means we're actually going to do this. Everin looked at him, her expression unreadable. We've been doing this since the moment I called you. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose shutters like distant small arms fire. The mountain air bit at their faces long before they reached the drop zone. From the open ramp of the transport, the valley below looked like a dark scar cut into the earth, the ridge lines rising like jagged teeth around it. The only light came from a thin smear of moon and the faint orange flicker of something, campfires, maybe, far beyond their route. Everin crouched near the edge, her headset crackling with Reeves's voice from the cockpit relay. Signals clean. Local chatters quiet. Your ghosts from here on. She signaled to Lachlan, who double-checked the harness clips. 2 minutes, he said, his grin barely visible behind the black paint streaked across his face. The wind roared when the green light flashed. One by one, they vanished into the night. They landed in silence on a snow-packed ridge, parachutes collapsing into the darkness as Reeves bundled the last of the lines. Winters was already scanning the perimeter, her rifle sweeping in a deliberate arc. "North Pat's clear," she said, voice low but steady. Everin pointed toward the shadowed outline of the goat trail Lachlan had mapped. "We move. No lights unless we hit a choke point." The descent was slow, every step calculated. The narrow trail was littered with loose shale, the kind that could carry sound farther than a rifle shot in the still air. Twice, they froze in place, once for the distant whine of an engine echoing off the cliffs, once for the faint beam of a flashlight sweeping across a far slope. By the time they reached the valley floor, the air was thicker, colder, the smell of pine cutting through the scent of rock and snow. Reeves knelt over his handheld scanner, picking up faint EM bursts ahead, matches the uplink profile. Everin signaled halt. They dropped to a crouch, blending into the tree-line. Ahead, through the skeletal branches, the uplink structure emerged, a squat frame bristling with antennae, its base guarded by two figures in heavy coats. Their breath fogged in the cold, rifle slung, but hands never far from the grips. "Pattern," she whispered. Reeves checked his readout. They pace in opposite arcs, 30-second gap at the rear corner. "That's ours," Everin said. "Winters on me. Lachlan, you're the shadow. Reeves, keep eyes on their comms." They moved during the gap, the snow barely crunching under their boots. At the rear corner, Everin waited for the second guard to pass, then signaled. Winters slipped forward, a quick strike to the base of the neck, sending the man into the snow without a sound. Lachlan was already on the uplink's side panel, tools flashing in the dark. "Timer set," he murmured. 30 seconds to blackout. Everin and Winters pulled the bodies into the tree-line. Reeves's voice came through the comm. "Second patrol inbound. 30 meters." "Move," Everin ordered. They were gone before the patrol arrived, the uplink vanishing into sudden darkness behind them. The compound's outer fence loomed ahead, 2 layers of chain link topped with razor wire, floodlights sweeping in mechanical arcs. Reeves killed the lights one by one as they moved along the perimeter, his device spitting bursts of interference that mimicked a power fluctuation. At the breach point, Lachlan's silent cutter worked through the wire in seconds. Winters slid through first, covering the far side. Everin followed, her focus locked on the warehouse structure they'd marked as the primary target. A low hum vibrated through the ground as they approached. Reeves frowned at his handheld. "Power spike. They've booted up whatever they didn't want anyone to see." Everin adjusted her grip on her rifle. "Then we're right on schedule." They reached the side door without raising an alarm. Lachlan popped the lock, easing it open just enough for the dark, cold air inside to spill out. Winters gave a quick nod. "Clear entry." Everin signaled them in. The door shut behind them with a whisper. Inside, the darkness was thick, broken only by the faint red glow of machinery deep within the warehouse. The hum was louder here, steady, mechanical, and ominous. Everin raised a hand. "Eyes up. This is where it gets real." The red glow deep inside the warehouse pulsed like a heartbeat, casting long shadows that shifted with each blink. The air was warmer here, laced with the faint smell of oil, metal, and something acrid that caught at the back of the throat. Everin led the way, rifle angled low, every step measured. Winters took the rear, her eyes never leaving the edges of the space, while Reeves moved along the wall, scanning for signals. Lachlan ghosted between them, already assessing the structure for potential breaches or traps. They passed rows of crates stenciled in Cyrillic, each one sealed with industrial-grade locks. The red glow grew brighter until they reached a central chamber cordoned off by heavy blast doors. The hum here was a vibration they could feel in their bones. Reeves crouched by a small access panel. "Encrypted," he murmured. "Not military-grade, worse. Custom build. Someone didn't want this talking to the outside world unless they told it to." Everin scanned the room. "How long?" 2 minutes if it's dumb. 5 if it's smart. "You've got 3. Lachlan's gaze roved over the crates. "These markings?" I've seen them before. Not weapons, components. High-energy capacitors, superconductors, he trailed off. This isn't just a base. It's a build site. The blast doors hissed and began to part. Inside, the red light resolved into banks of humming cylinders linked by thick conduit, each one crowned with a cooling shroud. At the center, a lattice of steel supported something that looked like an unfinished satellite dish, except it was pointed horizontally, not at the sky. "What the hell is that?" Winters whispered. Reeves's scanner pinged. "It's emitting in short bursts on a narrow beam straight through the mountains. Whatever's on the other end is tuned to catch it." Evren's mind ran through possibilities: communications relay, targeting array, energy weapon. But none fit cleanly. Whatever Viper was building, it wasn't meant to stay here. A sound cut through the hum, footsteps, rapid and purposeful, coming from the far side of the chamber. Evren signaled cover positions. A side door burst open and 2 guards entered, rifles up. The first went down to Winters's suppress shot. The second hesitated just long enough for Lachlan to drop him with a chokehold. "Reeves," Evren said, "can you pull whatever data this thing's been sending?" "Already on it," he said, fingers flying over his tablet. But he froze. "Oh hell. They know we're here." The facility's emergency lighting shifted from red to harsh white, and the hum in the air climbed into a high-pitched whine. Somewhere beyond the chamber, a klaxon began to wail. "Extraction route?" Winters asked. Evren glanced at Reeves. "We've got maybe 8 minutes before this place goes full lockdown," he said. "And if I'm reading this right, that dish? It's not done, but it's functional enough to send one last burst. Viper might already be on the receiving end." Lachlan stepped forward. "We can't leave it intact. I've got charges prepped." Evren's eyes swept the chamber. "Plant them." Winters, cover. "Reeves, finish pulling what you can. We might need it to explain to Thornburg why we just blew up his proof." As Lachlan moved between the cylinders, Winters took up a firing position at the blast doors. Evren stood watch, her mind already spinning through contingencies. A deeper rumble shuddered through the floor. Engines, maybe, or something heavier. Reeves's voice was tight. "Whatever's coming, it's not on foot." Evren keyed her comm, change of plan. "We're out as soon as those charges are set. If we have to fight our way clear, we do it in the open, not in a steel box." Lachlan gave a thumbs up from across the room. "Timer's on 4 minutes." The whine from the machinery spiked, echoing off the steel walls. Somewhere in that sound, Evren thought she heard the faint mechanical rhythm of something counting down. She didn't wait to confirm it. "Move." The team slipped back into the corridor, leaving the unfinished machine humming in its cage, the charges ticking toward detonation. Outside, the white floodlights of the compound blazed to life, and in their glare, shadowed figures began to pour from the barracks. The compound erupted into motion. Shouts echoed off the steel walls, boots pounded against frozen ground, and the sharp mechanical clack of rifles being readied cut through the cold air. From their position in the corridor, the team could see the floodlights sweeping like angry searchers across the yard. Evren signaled with 2 quick hand gestures, split and flank. They moved like water around obstacles, each member flowing into position without a word. Lachlan slipped left along the shadowed wall. Winters took high ground on a maintenance catwalk. Reeves hunched over his device in the cover of stacked crates, and Evren kept low in the center, rifle ready. Through the comm, Reeves's voice was a tense whisper. "4 squads mobilizing. 2 headed toward our breach point. They're on to our exit. Then we make a new one," Evren said. A spotlight beam swept dangerously close. Winters's suppressed shot cracked the air, the light shattering in a fizz of sparks. Shadows rushed back in like allies. Lachlan reached a side gate and set a small charge, barely a cough when it blew, just enough to peel the lock without drawing attention. "Path's open," he hissed. Evren started forward, but movement near the barracks caught her eye. A cluster of soldiers breaking formation, moving with more purpose than the others. They weren't regular guards. Their gear was darker, cleaner, their rifles fitted with optics meant for long-distance precision. "Special detail," she murmured. "Probably Viper's personal security." Winters's voice crackled in her ear. If they're here, he's not far. No time to hunt, Evren replied. We blow the dish, we leave. They moved fast now, darting between cover points, every second eaten by the ticking clock in Lachlan's pack. From somewhere deeper in the compound came the grinding roar of engines, heavy vehicles, maybe armored, firing up for pursuit. Reeves tapped his screen. Charges synced. We've got 90 seconds before it's fireworks. Evren's mind flashed through the map. The goat trail out of the valley was too exposed now, the breach point compromised. That left the drainage run beneath the west fence, a narrow culvert barely big enough to crawl through, half-choked with ice. She signaled the change. No one argued. They reached the culvert just as the first distant shots rang out. Bullets snapped into the snow behind them, spraying ice and dirt. Winters returned fire in short, precise bursts, each one buying them a few more steps. Lachlan dove into the culvert first, his pack scraping the sides. Reeves followed, then Winters, sliding in backward so she could keep firing until the last possible second. Evren was last. She crouched at the culvert mouth, scanning the yard. Figures were closing in fast, rifles up, shouts blending into a single urgent roar. She fired twice, then ducked into the tunnel, the cold biting through her gloves as she crawled. Halfway through, the charges went off. The ground convulsed under them, the blast a deep, chest-punching thud that rolled through the valley. Heat chased them down the tunnel, followed by a gust of air carrying the scent of scorched metal and vaporized snow. They emerged on the far side into the forest, the world here still dark except for the brief, dying glow of the explosion behind them. In the distance, the floodlights winked out one by one, plunging the compound into chaos. Reeves was already on comms. Interference is down. We're ghosts again. Evren didn't slow. Not for long. Move. They pushed into the trees, feet crunching over frozen undergrowth, the sound masked by the ringing still hanging in their ears from a blast. Behind them, shouts turned to panic confusion, the enemy unsure where to chase first. By the time the first pursuit teams found the destroyed uplink and shattered compound yard, Obsidian was already vanishing into the mountain shadows. Just another set of ghosts leaving no trace except the echo of their passage.